What we saw there was a different way of living. A way the world doesn't want to embrace. But a way that we're called to embrace. Let's pray. Father God, we want to thank you for your love for us and your guidance. And Lord, as we open your word today, I just pray that your Holy Spirit will teach us. That we will hear from you, and that we won't just hear from you, we will respond. That you will touch our hearts and our minds. We'll see you afresh. And then we will realize, Lord, not only how much you have loved us, but how much you want us to love. So God, as we sit at your feet today, we just ask that you instruct us. In Christ's name. Amen. Do you have any enemies? Hands go up on that. At least one. Most of us have or have had enemies, maybe more than one. When I was in 7th grade, I had an enemy. His name was David. David was this guy that I really, to this day, I don't know what his issue was, other than the fact that maybe he saw me as different. Maybe he saw me as somehow somebody that he could put down a little bit so that he could be raised up in the light of others. I don't know, because I didn't even know this guy. But David saw me as somehow weaker than he was, and he wanted to make a point. And so in PE, he did everything he could to figure out ways to humiliate me, to make me look bad so that he could look better. And there was one time especially that I remember that he tried to do something that would have totally humiliated me in the class. Thankfully, thank God, I discovered it at the time. But after that, I mean, I was always avoiding David because I knew that David was after me. And it took me years to get over that. I didn't have, after that class, I had no interactions with him. But for years, I would think about David as my enemy. My enemy. Until I learned to forgive David. Until I learned to look at David in a different light. I just happened to, as I was preparing this, I looked on Facebook and found his profile. And he's got he's got a wife, he's got a couple of kids, cute kids, he's got his own business. I'd like to meet him again someday. But you know, we have to get beyond our anger at our enemies. We have to get beyond our hatred of our enemies. We've got to get to the point where we love our enemies. And that's a trick. You see, we like the idea of eliminating enemies, right? Eliminating enemies, yeah! The Christian way is what we need to be doing. A Christian way of eliminating enemies. Memory verse today is Romans 12:21. It says, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Don't be overcome by evil. Okay? Doesn't mean knuckle down, allow it to completely suppress you, completely absorb you. Overcome it with good. I have to think, what could I have done at the time period to turn that situation around? How could I have treated David differently in the years after that I could have gained a friend? And I don't know. But that would have been a sure way to eliminate the enemy, the Christian. Thing is sometimes we can't avoid having enemies. Sometimes people are going to hate us for whatever reason, and we can't stop that. But if we wish to try, if we wish to try to eliminate our enemies, we can start out by rejecting revenge. By rejecting revenge. Because, see, this is something we really want to take, isn't it? Someone hurts you, what do you want to do? I want to hurt him back. Man, you hit me, I'm going to hit you back. Ow. Hurt my hip. That's what we want to do, though. We want to take revenge. We don't like to ever be hurt. We don't like to be embarrassed. Our natural inclination is to retaliate. Several years ago, a delegation of Brazilian Indians went to see the president of their country. But they got turned away. They couldn't meet with him. Why? Because they were told, well, you guys aren't wearing ties. And so if you don't wear ties, you can't go in to see the president. Well, they got kind of angry at this. And so they had a press conference, and they basically said in the press conference, okay, from now on, any person from the government who wants to come see us has to wear a feathered headdress and face paint. They were retaliating. They were saying, if you want to come to see us, you have to look like us. We're not going to get, no. Now you think, you might laugh, hey, sure, that's a fun way to retaliate, right? But what does it accomplish? Nothing. Are the sides meeting? Are they getting together? No. All it does is increase the problem. See, that's what happens when we retaliate normally. When we retaliate, we just cause the problem to get worse. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand in a war situation, someone strikes and you need to stop that. That's a completely different matter if you're retaliating in order to end the war. But most of the time in our personal interactions with people, it's not about ending something. It's about putting up our wall because they put up their wall, and we're just going to be fighting with each other continually. Because we're saving face. We are salvaging our pride. And one thing we learn about Jesus Christ is this man did not stand on pride. You don't wash people's feet because you're prideful. You don't allow yourself to be crucified because you're prideful. No. You're giving yourself to others. Jesus offers us a better way than retaliation in Matthew 5:38 through 42. He says, you've heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Now, this passage has been used over and over, and one of the problems with it is it's often misunderstood. So we're going to unpack it a little bit. We're going to look at it a lot more closely than probably you normally look at it before. So, Joy, what I want you to do is go back to verse 1. We're going to go through it, okay? The first verse, 5:38, okay? You've heard when it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. Now, this in context, the reason that Jesus starts this out and talks about this, in context, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, refers back to a law, basically, that is called the Lex Talionis. The Lex Talionis was there before our Bible was written. It came from the Code of Hammurabi. And it basically is a legal way of trying to diffuse a situation. For example, it says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But too many times when we get hurt, we don't want to stop there. So, you hit me, right? And how do I react? You hit me? I hit you! We escalated, right? We don't want to stop there. And they recognized this, and feuds were going on. And so what they did in the Near East, this law code came out and said, no, it needs to be appropriate. Okay? Someone steals your cow, then you need to get compensation for that. You may get a cow in exchange, or he gives you the money for it. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It needs to be the person who was hurt needs to be paid back. It's not somebody else getting angry for them. It needs to be basically paying, a fair amount here, trying to compensate. That's what this was about. It was in not only the Code of Hammurabi, it is also, you can find it if you read in Exodus and Leviticus. It is embedded in there, this idea of this is how you handle things so it doesn't get out of control. Okay, so that's what Jesus is saying. This is the law of retaliation needs to be fair here, and this is how it was in the Old Testament. It says you've heard that. However, go to verse 2. Or the second verse, I'm sorry. Yeah, 39. He says, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also. When it's talking about in this context, and we see it later on in verse 40, etc., do not resist an evil person, basically is the idea of taking this guy to court. Because this eye for eye, tooth for tooth, it wasn't that you just took the justice. You went through a legal process. And so when someone does something to you, don't just automatically say, I'm going to take him to court. I'm going to take him to court. Say, no. There's a better way. He says, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Now, I can explain this, just some words, but it's so much better if we do it, visually. Robbie, come up here, please. Why don't you stand right there? Thank you. Now, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, please show me your right cheek. Okay, I'm going to get this slap on the right cheek, right? Now, I could use my left hand, but quite frankly, in the Old Testament times and in a lot of places today, the left hand is the dirty hand. You don't necessarily use this. Most people are right-handed. So I'm going to slap him with my right hand on his right cheek. Wait a minute. Kind of hard, right? So I have to use the back of my hand. All right, we call it backhanding, but what they're meaning here is slapping. So if I'm slapping him like this, okay, now he's going to enjoy that, right? No. It's an insult. It doesn't not only hurt, it's a huge insult in the context, in the culture. Thank you very much. I'm not actually going to slap you. You thought I was going to slap you. But in the culture, it was hugely insulting. A person's honor has been affected. But not only that, it's illegal. Do you remember in the book of Acts when the chief priests had the guy slap him? Do you remember that? We talked about that. And what was Paul's reaction? He got angry. He said, you whitewashed tomb, etc. How can you school me on the law when you're breaking it yourself? It was illegal. They couldn't do this. You could take a person to court. But, here's what Jesus says. Don't take him to court. You have the right, you have the legal right to take this evil person, to resist them by taking them to court. Instead, turn to them the other cheek also. What are you doing? You're not retaliating. You're not getting your legal right here. You're diffusing the situation, and you're basically being the bigger person. Look at the next verse. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. Okay? Coat was like a cloak. The way the common dress of the time period was, you had basically three principal garments. You had the loincloth, that was like your underwear. Okay? Then you had an outer covering that was next to your skin. This was like your tunic. This was that shirt that they're talking about. Then you had over this, you had an outer garment. This was your cloak or your coat. He says, if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, in other words, take the inner garment, okay? Hand over your coat as well. See, a person could do that. They could sue you for this, for whatever reason, you owed them money, whatever. They could sue you for this. But legally, they could not take the coat. The reason is, a lot of poor people at that time period, that's what they had to sleep in. This was their only big garment. Legally, even if you took it away for a debt for a period of time, you had to have it back to the person by sundown. It was in their law. Okay? So what he's saying, yeah, they can legally, they want to sue you for your shirt. Okay, let them do that. Then be the bigger person and hand over your coat as well. They can't touch that. They have no right to that. You're giving it to them of your own free will. Go to the next one. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. At this time, legally, the Romans could impress you to go 1 mile with them. 1 Roman mile. They could come up to somebody, they could see you, they say, man, I have these bags, I don't want to carry them. I'm going to get Klein here, and Klein is going to have to carry my bags for 1 mile. Okay? They could do that. It was legal. You might get outraged about it, you might be upset about it, nothing you can do. But Jesus says, you know what, if he forced you to go 1 mile, go with them too. Be the bigger person, the bigger person. Be the person that is going to, as you do good with them, they're going to go, why? Why are you doing this? Just don't understand. In the next verse, it says, give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Okay? Giving to the one who asks you, not necessarily lending them money, because one of the things that some people did, they lent them money with interest. And it's like, no. If they ask for it, give it to them. And don't turn away the one who wants to borrow from you. The idea of generosity, not just, oftentimes they had what are called alms. Alms were what you gave to the poor, what you gave to other people, and there was a specific amount you could give. He's saying, don't just be stingy with this. Give generously. Give to others. Basically, all of this in context, all of this is basically, somebody comes to you, they have legal rights against you. They can use the law, whatever, turn it on its head. Flip it around. Be the better person. It deals with our reaction to personal attacks. Diffuse it. Now, it doesn't mean never defend yourself. It doesn't mean the state shouldn't punish crimes. You can look in the Bible at other passages. Nehemiah, when they're strapping on swords to defend themselves. Or in Romans 13:4, listen to this. It says, for the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. In society, we can have people that we appoint as rulers, that we appoint as policemen, that we appoint as people to be in charge of us, and they have the legal and moral right to defend people. You have some groups that say, no, a Christian should never bear arms. A Christian should never defend themselves or others, and that's really not biblical. Don't take this passage and say, that is absolutely what it's saying. I think in many times, yes, a personal attack, a Christian should just take the other cheek. Sure. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to stand by, and if I see somebody being killed or raped, then I'm not going to do anything as a Christian. We have an obligation to prevent evil, to try to stop it. But what this passage is saying is that in most personal interactions, be the better person. Be the better person. Don't automatically say, you hit me, I kill you. Isn't that surprising that God would do something like this? That God would take our normal inclination and turn it up on his head? Not really. Because God does it all the time. He did it to us. I mean, he could very well have just said, forget you guys. You guys sinned. You guys caused this problem. You rebelled against me. You're now toast. No. God doesn't think that way. God turns things around. It's not about personal revenge in many ways. Instead, it's about turning the tables. Turning the tables. The concept, if you don't know what this means, turning the tables means basically reversing the situation somehow. It actually came from, anybody play backgammon in here? Know the game backgammon or chess also as well, maybe chess? Used to be that there was a technique, and I'm not sure how legal this is in the game, but there was a technique of where you would take the game board and you would turn it around and make the other person play the opposite of what they've been playing. In backgammon used to be called the game of tables. And to turn the tables was to turn it around to make them play the opposite side. Basically what this is when you turn the tables on somebody, you are reversing the situation. And look at how Paul explains this in Romans 12, 19 through 21. He says, do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. Then listen, on the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will keep burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good, which is our memory verse. Joy, go back to the verse right before that. Now, when we look at this, this is a little bit puzzling. We can understand if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. And in doing this, you'll heap burning coals on his head. That doesn't sound very pleasant at all, does it? I mean, come on, how is this the idea of not doing doing good to somebody? I mean, burning coals on my head, I don't think would be very fun. And scholars have puzzled over this for years, and some of them have said, well, maybe in Egypt at the time, they had this thing that if you were going to show shame and contrition for what you did, they would sometimes have this thing with burning coals that they would have on their heads. And of course, it would hurt, you get red-faced and everything else, and that was a way to show your sorrow. And so they're saying, well, if your enemy's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to eat. In sort of what you're going to do is make him feel bad. Make him feel sorry. Make him feel shame. Okay, I can see that being effective, but it really doesn't go with the next verse, does it? Overcoming evil by what? With good. However, another thing, another interpretation that happens, is they talk about how at the time period also, you baked your bread, right, in the morning, and you have to have your fire, but sometimes your coals would go out. And so how are you going to bake your bread? And so sometimes people would go and borrow coals from somebody else's fire so they could get their fire started again. And so if you have enough for yourself and your neighbor comes and needs more coals, then you give them to them. Basically, it's saying, be a blessing. Be a blessing. Your enemy is hungry, give them something to eat. They're thirsty, give them something to drink. Heap coals on their head. They come to you, they're your enemy, but you don't treat them that way. Instead, you turn the tables on them by treating them with kindness. By providing, heaping burning coals on them. Giving them something that will completely transform the situation. Turn the tables. And so it makes complete sense if you look at the context of overcoming evil with good. And following this can have amazing results. A few years ago, I told an illustration here that you've probably forgotten, some of you. But it's about this Hungarian man. He was a Hungarian lawyer who fought against the Soviets when they were trying to take over Hungary, etc., and had to be a political refugee. He had to come to America. Now, this guy's very well educated. For the sake of privacy, they call him Joseph Cooter, but that's not his real name. But Joseph Cooter came to this country in 1956, and he had no money, no job, no place to stay, etc., but he was extremely well educated. He spoke several languages. He tried to get on as a lawyer, but he didn't know enough about American law. They were very polite to him and said, sorry, we can't use you. So he thought, what can I do? And then he thought about, well, since I speak several languages, maybe I could be used in the import-export business. And so he ended up contacting a major import-exporter and offered his service, wrote them a letter and said, I would like to apply. And then he got this letter back, and it was really, really rude. And the letter said, why would I even hire somebody like you who can't even write English very well? And yet the letter that Joseph Cooter was receiving had all these grammar errors. And so Cooter was angry. He was insulted. And so he sat down, he got his piece of paper out, and he wrote this really, scathing letter, just ripping this guy to shreds. And as he was getting ready to nail it, he remembered in the Bible that a gentle answer turns away wrath. And he just felt convicted. And so he tore it up. And he wrote another letter. And he thanked the man. He said, thank you for pointing out my English. I'm a recent immigrant. And yeah, I'm sure that I have problems with my English. Thank you for pointing that out so that I can do better in the future. I appreciate it. 2 days later, he gets a phone call asking him to come in for an interview. They want to hire him as a correspondent, a letter writer, because, I guess, of his kind way of responding. And in a few years, he found himself vice president and executive director right under the man who had written that letter and his basically heir apparent to take over the company. But the thing is that he could have just retaliated. Cooter could have decided, no, this guy he's wrong, I'm going to just blast him. But instead, because he understood a gentle answer turns away wrath, and he understood what was right, instead, through kindness, he turned the tables. And an amazing thing happened in his life. See, Christ's teaching goes beyond revenge. It goes beyond even turning the tables. It's about loving our enemies. It's about loving our enemies. Not just putting up with them, not just ignoring them. Loving our enemies. That's not easy. It's not easy. It truly requires us to step back emotionally from the situation and to see our enemies through Christ's eyes. That's what we've been talking about, right? Seeing people through Christ's eyes, seeing the world through Christ's eyes. Seeing our enemies through Christ's eyes. There was a pastor back in the Revolutionary War period by the name of Reverend Peter Miller. And in the town of Epaphra where he lived, there was this guy by the name of Michael Whitman who was always causing him trouble. He was always trying to figure out ways to humiliate him, find ways to mess him up, etc. Don't know why, but this was Whitman's job, it seemed to take, to somehow make this pastor's life miserable. Well, one day Whitman, who was a little bit of a spark himself, got in trouble and was convicted for treason. And General Washington was going to hang him. And Peter Miller walked 70 miles to encounter Washington, who he happened to know. And he asked him to spare this man's life. And Washington said, "I'm sorry. This man has committed treason. I can't just spare this guy because he's your friend." And Peter Miller said, my friend, this guy is my worst enemy." And Washington said, "Oh, well, that makes things completely different. You walk 70 miles to save an enemy? Then I'll pardon you." There's only one way to follow. And that's Christ. Matthew 5:43-44 says this. "You've heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor, hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies, and pray for those who persecute you." Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. How often have you prayed for your enemy? When's the last time? Think for a second. Think of your enemy. I'm sure you can think of one if you think about it. When's the last time you prayed for them? You want the amazing thing about prayers? It helps you step back. It helps you no longer to be so emotionally in it about your own rights, because now you're caring about someone else. It's incredibly empowering. It's incredibly freeing when you pray for your enemy. You're no longer the victim. At least you don't have that mentality. You're an agent of change. You are being God's man or woman, trying to help this other person. It's a total mind switch for you. It shifts our perspective. We engage, when we pray for our enemies, we engage the true enemy, not this person. But we engage sin, we engage fear, we engage insecurity, we engage faithlessness. That's what we're praying against. And it changes us. And ultimately can change them. Loving friends is easy. Look at Luke 6:32-34. It says, "If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full." In other words, you can do all that. You can love your friends. You can love others when you expect to get something out of it. But instead, you should just love your enemies too. you should love them as well. It's harder, but it's of incredible value to them and to us. And when we do so, when we love our enemies, we are following after our Father. We are following after our Father. Now, my autocorrect, when I was typing this sermon, doesn't like this phrase. It thinks it should read instead, following our Father. Leave out the after. But what's the difference between following after our Father and following our Father? See, following our Father is like our Father goes this way and we walk after our Father. But following after is another way of saying taking after. In other words, resembling. Being the kind of person He is. If we follow after someone in this respect, basically we are taking on the attributes of God. And God is an amazing being, is He not? We are called to be conformed to the image of Christ, who Himself is the embodiment of the Father. And remember, when we think of that, this is the same Father that, while we were still sinners, sent Christ to die for us. While we were enemies, He sent His own Son into the world so that we might also become children of God. That's an amazing love. That is something completely out of the box in thinking-wise, right? And that's what we need to be following after. Listen to Jesus' words in Luke 6, 35 and 36. He says, "But love your enemies. Do good to them. Lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will," say this with me, "be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful." Not giving our enemies what we think they deserve, but instead showing kindness can transform them. When President Calvin Coolidge, early in his presidency, he was staying in a hotel. And in the middle of the night, he woke up because there was a cat burglar in there. Guy had snuck in. He was going through the pockets of the president's suit, etc., and stealing stuff. And rather than raising an alarm, etc., Calvin spoke quietly to him and said, "If you wouldn't, please don't take the watch chain. I've got a charm on it that I'm kind of fond of." Well, you can imagine this guy. And then Coolidge began having a conversation with this guy. Found out that this guy was a student that couldn't pay his hotel bill, and he needed money to be able to get back to campus. You know what those college students are like, right? I mean, come on. And this guy, had been needing money, so he was stealing. I'm not even sure he knew it was the president he was stealing from, but he's stealing this money, right? Trying to get back to campus. And so, once Coolidge understands how much he needs, he's already talked the guy into giving him all his stuff back. He takes his wallet, he reaches in, he takes out $32, which is what was needed, and he gives it to the guy. He says, "Here, it's a loan. Pay it back." And then he told him how to go back out so he wouldn't get killed by the Secret Service agents who were out there. Thing is, Coolidge got paid back. Why? Because his kindness transformed. His love of the enemy transformed. He was following after the example that we see of our Father. So the question I have to ask us is this: are we making eternal enemies our future friends? I mean, in life, your enemies, are they going to be your enemies from now on? Are you working at making them future friends? Abraham Lincoln, during the height of the Civil War, got in trouble with his own people, own side, because he was talking about trying to be benevolent to the Southern rebels. And people were saying, no, you can't do that. You got to destroy the enemy. Lincoln said this, he says, I destroy my enemies when I make them my friends. I destroy my enemies when I make them my friends. So, you and I will always have enemies. But if we follow God's ways, we may end up with fewer of them. Proverbs 16:7 says this. It says, when the Lord takes pleasure in anyone's ways, in other words, we're following Him, He causes their enemies to make peace with Him. So I have a challenge for you. This week I want you to identify your enemies. Think about it. Pray about it. Your enemies. And ask the Lord to show them to you in a new light. Learn to see them as opportunities for friendship. And I want us to close with this video.
He's trying to trap me, you see. I'm not falling for it.
Has he ever trapped you?
You are ruthless. Thank you. Hey, you play? I can teach you.
I'm gonna get in trouble.
Come in.
There's no way out of this.
He's obviously out.
How did you do that?
He had a great teacher.